Hi, my name is Jim Stinger, and I'm the president of the San Francisco chapter of the Society of West Coast Artists. And I'd like to welcome you to our November demo. We have Steve Curl with us, who's going to give us a demonstration of landscapes in watercolor. So let me, by way of introduction, just give a few words. Steve says, I am fortunate to have chosen to pursue the artist's life. It has allowed me to spend my time as I wish and actually earn a living from making art and teaching. I love being outdoors and in wilderness. I paint from my direct experience on hikes and excursions where I've spent awestruck moments in each of these landscapes. The expression of the infinite is always there in front of us if we are open to seeing and receiving it. Watercolor is very natural, as it is basically pigment and water on paper and how these two elements organically interact. It is simple, spontaneous, and surprising, yet challenging to control. It is a joyfully portable medium with supplies easily stowed in a backpack. Setup and cleanup are relatively easy, and paintings dry within 10 minutes of completion. This affords me the opportunity to record my visual impressions quickly and with a natural freshness. If I am not deliberately on location to paint plein air, I'll often take photos, do a small, quick study on the spot, then finish a larger painting back in my studio. All of my paintings seek to capture my experience where a turn in the trail has caught my eye, and I am again witness to the rush of beauty and the expression of light displayed before me. It is a constant gift to see and be attentive to these instances. My paintings are my response to these inspired moments, an expression of what is fresh, immediate, and alive, and what in my estimation is true and real. I hope you enjoy them. So now let's join Steve with his demonstration of landscape in watercolor. Take it over, Steve.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I'm going to do a painting today, or get started on one anyway, of an image I took up in Yosemite when I was actually teaching a plein air workshop there. So I have it here on my iPad. Here's a print of it so you can see. It was up in Glacier Point.
Right there.
There we go.
Yes, there you go.
All right. And I have it here on my iPad, which is more true to the, the colors that I saw up there. And it was a magnificent day. Just the light was just crystal clear, and no smoke from the fires that had been there the week before. So we were up at Glacier Point, and the clouds were just like moving through. So certainly inspiration for me. So I'm going to paint from this photo, and I recommend painting from your iPad because it's backlit. You know, it's like looking at a slide as opposed to a photograph. So the light emits, and so it's very close to the lighting and the coloring that I saw up there. I'm working with a block, 12 by 16 block of Arches 140-pound cold press. Nice surface, and I'm working with, my palette is Holbein colors. I have a few Daniel Smiths in there as well, but mostly it's a palette of Holbein colors. And then I got a valise of brushes here. Take good care of your brushes; they'll last you a lifetime. So all right, without further ado, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is attack the sky here. And I'm just going to wet the sky a bit because I'm going to do a wet into wet here. And feel free as I'm going, ask any questions that might pop up for you. So I'm wetting this down, and what this is going to give me, anybody who's a watercolorist knows this, but it allows me to get soft edges on areas. Especially clouds. And it was a really interesting cloudy day up there. So I'm just wetting my sky down here. I painted a slight tilt so that I can control the flow of the water to some degree. That's pretty good coverage. You got to kind of look at it from an angle to make sure you've got all the glistening. All right. So next what I'm going to do is go ahead and mix up some shadow tones for my clouds. And that's mostly going to be a little ultramarine blue. And I'm going to pick up some alizarin crimson here, which kind of moves the clouds to a shadowy tone. Maybe a touch of cerulean. That's about right. So I did this drawing before I arrived, before I came up here today. So I could use most of my time painting. This particular drawing probably took me maybe a half hour to orchestrate. So I'm just pulling in some of the shadow tones on the clouds here. And this is giving me kind of a nice soft edge of the clouds. Let this cloud ducking right behind. Back here, the clouds get smaller and they stack up. So this gives me the illusion of depth and perspective here. All the shadows are kind of on the under side of the clouds. All right. A few minutes to set up. Okay, let's see how this fares here.
Your head is blocking that. Sorry.
It's over here.
What color are you using now?
I'm using a mix of cerulean and ultramarine, and I'm trying to capture these distant shadows
Okay.
back here in this landscape, leaving a few places where the tan color I just put down shows through. These places where the rock is showing through here. Just trying to get kind of a nice pale shadow tone as I come up here into Clouds Rest and Tenaya Canyon. This is Clouds Rest here. As the name implies, you can see it right behind Half Dome. I've been on top of both these places. It's pretty amazing. I've climbed Half Dome up the cables, and I've hiked up here to Clouds Rest as well, which is really a trip, because you get up on top of Clouds Rest, you get to see what you see. You see Half Dome from the other side. Really cool.
Okay.
I'm wondering, would it help if I sat down and kept my head out of the camera? Would that be useful, you think?
We might try that, just
Yeah,
so we can get a little more detail on
yeah, let me pull closer. I'll just sit down. That might be
the.
easier, because it looks like every time I bow over, yeah, I'll grab one of those. Thanks. That way I won't be sticking my head. So you tell me.
Might be easier for you too, I don't
A
know.
little easier, yeah, on the lower back. The
Yeah,
main thing is that I'm not sticking my head everywhere.
So
Yeah.
then we need to.
And that might be useful. Okay. So what's great about Yosemite is you get these incredible patterns of light and shadow. Just create a lot of ground.
Move your iPad up about a smudge. Yeah, that's great. Then they can see that.
Good. And all I'm trying to do is get this light shadow pattern way off in the distance here. and try to keep that thing we call aerial perspective in place.
Now, when you're out, you do most of this plein air, right? Most of the time?
A mix of both. You know, when I'm there to paint, you know, it's great. You know, I'll sit down and I'll paint plein air. But a lot of the time I'm hiking with friends, you know, and so it's kind of like, you guys mind if I stop for an hour and a half and paint? And they go, huh? You know, so I take a lot of photographs like this for reference for when I'm back in the studio. And as I said, I like to work from my iPad because it's very accurate in terms of the lighting, what I saw back there. So that gives me a good tool that replicates, you know, what I experienced there. In this case, you know, I mean, when it comes to like painting trees and clouds, you can kind of paint what you want. And, you know, but like in a case of like Half Dome, it's such a recognizable feature that your draftsmanship has to be pretty spot on there. You know, I remember a few years back, I was teaching a workshop in Yosemite. One of the people in my class, it was the first time she'd ever been to Yosemite. And she handled her brush pretty well. She was great. You know, she just didn't recognize the rock forms per se. That the more you spend time up in Yosemite, the more you just learn to see things the way they really are up there. Anyway, we were sitting out in the Awani Meadow painting and with the group, and a bunch of people hiking by or walking by stopped to see what we were doing. And this person had painted Half Dome, but she had drawn it kind of like a big mushroom.
Oh.
You know, instead of, I mean, it really does look like a big hostess snowball that somebody chopped in half with a knife. But she painted a different shape, and somebody came up behind her and was like, "Oh, it's looking pretty good. What rock is that?" Oh. So good to get, you got to get those things accurate. It'd be like painting the Matterhorn or the Statue of Liberty or all of these things. So
Yeah.
okay.
So when you're doing watercolor plein air, are you drawing it first on your pad like you would from a photo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm drawing it first to get my shapes right. I need to sort of know where I'm going. And so that's important. That's about right. So now I'm going to start to put in there some trees creeping around way back here. But at this distance, they're kind of a bluish gray green. Can't get too bright with my color here.
Were you still working with the same colors?
What's that?
Are you still working with the same colors?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm starting to put in some of these distant greens
Okay,
back
because I
in
thought it
here.
looked kind of green now.
Yeah, so the greens back here, they're trees obviously, but they're way in the distance. So I'm gonna put those in. I'm using Hooker's green with a little bit of blue and a touch of Payne's gray in it, just to get this distant color. And I'm going to start to put some of these. There's a few warmer greens on the trees that are creeping up here on the side of Half Dome. So I'm going to use a little sap green, which it's closer, and so closer things get, the warmer generally the tones are, or the hue. And so I'm getting some little sunlight on some of the wood forest up here as it creeps around the base of the dome and across this shoulder here. And sap is a good color for that. Maybe a touch of burnt sienna in the mix warms it up a little bit. And an earthy olivey color. So I just, put the overall shape of the forest I'm seeing up there, leaving a few gaps, some places where the woods creep over. And then at the edge, I'll use a smaller brush here. And I'll just illustrate some of the treetops a little bit so that I just want to get a good shape on these trees, and some of them just have these little points that stick up. They're just evergreens that are, but again, it's important to get a good suggestion of the shapes so that it reads properly. That's good. We're getting some of these trees creeping down in here as well. Just catching a little bit of light as the sun creeps over the backside. This is buying me a little time, so when I'm ready to put the shadow tone in over here on Half Dome, I'll get that.
So Steve, is your paper still a little wet now, or you painting it
Yeah,
dry?
it is in some places, and so I have to allow it in places to dry so I get the right washes going
Yeah.
on. And I always test kind of with the back of my hand. So
Mhm.
this area has dried somewhat, so I can come in here and tie this together. And I'm going to be fine with that. Yeah, it's working. Good. Okay. Let's get back there. Get a darker band of green. There's some woods way back in the distance. Just a whole forest coming down here. So I'm gonna see if I can get that in. So what's happening back there is these clouds are casting really fascinating light and shadow patterns. So what you're getting in these distant woods back there is you're getting places where the light is hitting, and then boom, it moves back into shadow. So I'm getting these bands of light breaking this up, which makes it, again, gives me something interesting to punch up here. Good. All right, kind of time for the big kahuna here. This is the, I got to mix up the tone of the base of Half Dome, which is going to be pretty dark. Nice rich. So this is Half Dome is a very distinctive shape. So I took great care to illustrate this properly. And it's hard to see up there, but they do, you know, I don't want this edge to be too perfect. So there's places where the granite flakes up there and you get a few cracks that kind of pull off in places. So it kind of helps to have a few of those show up.
When you do your workshops, do you have your students work from photos you've taken or from photos they've taken?
Both. Most of the time when I teach in Yosemite, I get them initially, you know, we start the class indoors, at least in past years since COVID, we haven't met indoors, so we just go out. But I have to, you know, the last workshop I did, most of the people had some experience. And so we went right on location to paint plein air. But in other of my workshops up there, I don't know who's going to be in it. You know, it's through the Yosemite Conservancy. So I could have some beginners, I could have some people who've had some experience. So I have to be prepared for, I don't know which brush to buy, you know, what paper to use. And so there's that. So when we were working indoors, I would work with people first. First, they have to help them buy supplies up there, or rent. You can rent them or borrow them too. But mostly it was spending an hour or two indoors. And the class went from like 10 to 2. So we'd maybe go from 10 to 12, just painting indoors, having to move the paint around so they got the feeling of how to use it and the transparent nature of it. So once they got that under their belt, then it was just a matter of having them feel comfortable knowing what supplies to use. And so then we went outside. That's half the battle. They just want, that's part of the reason for the program, is to get people outside, seeing Yosemite as an artist does, you know, get outside, get away from the pizza joints and, you know, t-shirt shops and outdoor gear, just get out in it. And that was spectacular. People just, you know, their eyes start to pop, especially like this particular day. I said, if you guys feel like it, we've got a bit of a drive ahead of us. You know, it's about 45 minutes to get up there from the valley, but it looks like a great day. And if you want, let's just go paint. Let's go paint Glacier Point. Fantastic. So this is kind of cool. There's this great flange that sticks out here on Half Dome. It's just catching light. That's really fun. There's some cracks up there, getting a few of those.
You teach in the local area too, don't you?
Yeah, I teach at the Pacific Art League of Palo Alto, and I teach a couple other places. University Art has classrooms, but lately I've been teaching mostly online because we're still, you know, everybody's, you know, a little afraid to gather. We were supposed to start back in at the Art League, but you know, people just, you know, with the resurgence of the Delta variant, people
Certainly not like watching. I'm using this is a Da Vinci brush. It's a Sable number 8. And this is letting me get in here and get some nice. Sometimes this is good to try to paint fast because you got to make Yeah, it's just good to make some decisions and not belabor it. Maybe more mistakes, who knows, but sometimes your freshest marks are best in watercolor. The easiest thing to do in watercolor is overwork a painting, but none of you've done that, huh?
No.
And I've got drawers full of overworked paintings here. But, there's this nice little negative shape down here between these two trees, which is great. Let me get that in. Cool. Sort of what we call a trap shape here. And this is deep blue. Okay. That in. And then I'm going to just quickly come in here. And I want to look for what I call some negative window shapes poking through the tree. So okay. I'm going to step back for a second. Let's see what this. All right, it's doing what I want. And then what's happening is there's a sort of a cloud shadow that's being passed over top.
Steve, would you like to take a break for maybe 5 minutes?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay,
That sounds
well-
good. Yeah. If you want, during that break, what I'll do is I'll put out some of my paintings you can take a look at.
Okay,
And any questions you have, I'm happy to answer those as well.
great. 5-minute break.
Good. Let's see. Yeah, feel free to come up and take a look at these if you'd like. So I'm going to mix that same color up. It's sort of alizarin with a little of this. That's what I want. And I'm going to lay this in up here. And then I'm going to give it a soft edge as it kind of creeps down the dome here. The lighting just keeps, you just get this hat dance going on up there. So now I got that in, and I'm going to put a little blue in it to suggest some cloud shadows. And then I'm just going to soften the edge for it to. But it's this back and side that's really getting blasted with light. Okay, that's what I want. Yeah, we're just about ready to start catching the foreground elements here. So
We'll look back here. There's maybe a couple little places I can touch up back here and suggest some colors in the rock. Good. So far, so good. It may come back later and darken a little of this, but not sure yet. Let me get the, I always try to get most of the big stuff done, and then I step back and say, okay, is this working or not? Where do I need to tune it up? So right now, I'm about to hit all these greens, so. So I'm going to start with nice, rich sap green. Some aureole and yellow. So there's a tremendous sunlight hitting these greens in the foreground. So that's what I'm after. Sap green, aureole and yellow, and maybe just a touch of red. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is hit this tree here. Get out here. So you might want to watch this, Terry. This is kind of how I painted those trees that you were looking at. So I'm getting this in to get the filigree around the edges, and then I'll come back to the bigger brush here in a second. So I get this in, and then back to this. As I have more space, I'll kind of get this in, and I'll go in stages like this.
You got both brushes going.
Yeah, so the bigger brush covers more of the detail, and then the smaller brush gives me some of the detail on the edges of the branches that I want, because I want that, you know, these cool edges here. And then I got to still go in and catch some of the darks, because the light's hitting one side of the tree more than the other. So I'm going to try to work quickly so I can still merge in some of these, get these colors all working together. And while I'm here, I'll catch this other tree. But I do, you know, I do it in stages, which helps me manage how wet or dry the color is. The more you paint, you kind of get an intuitive idea of like, how far can I go before I need to address it, before it dries on me completely. So you start to figure that out. And that can change depending on the climate. Painting up in the high country in Yosemite, oh my God, it's so dry up there that, you know, in the sunshine especially, you know, you might pick a nice shady spot to begin with, but usually within an hour it's you basking in sunshine. You put color down and it's dry before you're even finished painting it. So it just, the atmosphere just sucks it right out. So I've got this edge of my meadow here, with that sort of a rough bumping edge. And then I'll catch this tree over here as well. Now, while these are setting up, now I'm going to come in and mix a darker green here. And what I'll do here is mix some ultramarine blue, some burnt sienna. I have a color here I like to use called shadow green, which is a really nice.
Are these, which brand are you using?
I'm using, I have mostly these are Holbein, but I have some, no, I have some Daniel Smith colors here as well. So I'm going to try to catch some of the dark side of this tree places. And it's still somewhat damp, so it gives me a kind of this melting soft edge, which I like. And I'll show you kind of a cool technique, which as I get this in, I sometimes like to come back and capture some of the warmth again. So this gives me this dark side. And then I'll come in and reprise light greens again. This is kind of fun because it gives me a really nice, it creates like a watermark or a blossom that you can work to your advantage. So I'll just come in and I can push this in, and it just gives me these little places where it makes the tree look more organic.
Mhm.
And I'll punch up the darks even a little bit more too. You gotta, you know, in some ways you just gotta play with it, you know, brush out here. That's a good one. Here I'm using a little neutral tint to mix with my darker green. So this helps me get some of these punchier darks in here. And I'll do the same over here. I'll do the same kind of dance with the dark side of the tree. This one started to dry on me, but I can come back and forth with it, which is kind of fun. Watercolor always dries. It's the hardest thing is you've got to mix color darker than you think, because it always dries lighter. You put down what you think you've got as a dark color and value, and then 15 minutes later, it's like, where's the beef? Yeah, so a couple places in here I can get. Later, I'll come and put the stem in. So I always put the stems in after I paint the foliage.
In a different color.
Yeah, where I see it, yeah, there's probably going to be a little more brown in the stem, but not always. Okay, got that one in. Now we'll do this one, these two over here. Again, start with my light yellow, green. A little bit of that color helps give me more of an olivey green up there. So I always paint the light color first, come in with the dark, and then I can go back and forth a little bit just to catch some of these kind of organic shapes here. Okay. So now the darks again. I use this nice shadow green and a little bit of neutral tint. That's a nice, neutral tint is a nice color. It's kind of wrongly named. I mean, when you, to tint a color, the correct term is you're lightening a color. In oil painting, to tint a color, mixing white with it. Whereas if you're darkening a color, you're shading it. You know, well, you don't use neutral tint to, it's a shade, you know, and so that's what they call it. Anyways, I would call it neutral shade. It's a nice dark that isn't quite black, and it's not warm or cool. There's a nice balance to it. So, but you know, you can use black or you can use Payne's gray and a little bit of brown, balance it out.
How does Payne's gray differ from neutral tint?
Payne's gray, and it depends a little bit on the manufacturer, but mostly Payne's gray has a bluish cast to it. It's kind of a blackish blue, so it's on the cool spectrum. I use it a lot for a darkening agent, but if it keeps my color too cool, then I'll cut it with burnt umber. I'll cut it with a brown to offset that. So bringing a warm back in there, and that'll bring it back to more of a neutral black. That's pretty good. All right, let's come back with some warms just to mess with it. Yeah, I like this technique. It gives me some nice organic marks that are sometimes in watercolor, if you can do it, just let the painting paint itself. Easier said than done, because we all want to get in there and muck with it, but it's some of the best things. I mean, I can remember having a student in my class, and she got this really great effect in some of her leaves, you know, on this tree. Yeah, it's just great, you know. I just said, that's really nice. What did you do to get that? She'd go, "He spilled my coffee." So it's like, don't touch it. Leave it the heck alone. All right, so that's good. So what I'll do next is, you know, we'll wrap this up pretty quick here. I mean, what I'll do is finish it to the best of my ability right now. And then later, what I like to do with any painting is I step away from it for a day, let's say, or an afternoon or something. And I'll go, is it doing what I want it to do? Like right now, I think what I'm going to do is darken these trees over here a little bit on this side, right, you know, warm those up just a touch. On the top of Half Dome over there, they're a little bit too peaked, but I don't have to be careful. I don't want to warm them up too much. That's a little better. I want to keep the distance so that I don't want to brighten it too much, but that's a little better color. Here again, it's, I know this, but I still mix the color I see, and then you look and you go, that's not quite there. Okay, so we got that. Couple dark shapes in here. Back with a few lights. Okay, so I'm going to let the trees dry here, and I'm going to paint this whole front section, which is the same thing. It's this bright yellow green. Just getting bathed with sunlight, merging right into the trees. So this sets, just the color and the value just set Half Dome off. So I'll skip with the brush a little bit to suggest some texture. And the same thing, while this is wet, there are some pockets of darker green in here. And I'm just gonna suggest that, sort of these browns and greens. Again, just suggesting some of the ridges between the plants. Try to connect a few of them up. Later, I might come back in and spatter, stamp, anything to suggest some of these textures in the field here. All right, good enough. Now what I'm gonna do is mix up a nice dark brown, and this is gonna be for the trees, the stems of the trees. So I just take burnt sienna is a good one, and I'll mix some blue with it. Get a nice, maybe a touch of alizarin, and a nice rich dark brown. There we go. And I'm just gonna stroke in some of these. And I break the line. You know, as I paint up, I have some places where the stem disappears into the foliage. And you look for kind of natural breaks and try to keep them uneven so they're not too predictable. And there's a couple places where you might get a branch or two flicking out like this. Not too much, but just enough just to break it up. And I'll do the same over here. All right, so, you know, for all intents and purposes, you know, it's the basics are all done. And then from this point on, it's going to be more of a tune-up. I can see already I want to go a little darker on the top of half dome. So I'm going to do that now while I'm thinking about it. Case in point, I put that in and it's like, I thought that was going to be dark enough and it was not. So let's do. Shadow shape up there. See how that works out. Oh, better. Give it a little hint of pink, just to give it a little excitement, not too much.
Okay, your head is obstructing. That's better.
There we go. All right.
Nice.
Yeah, as I say, what I'll do is I like the aerial perspective going on this. There's good distance in the piece. I'll come back in and play with a few things later.
maybe put in a couple of unifying washes in places that I think will help tie it together. But for the most part, I kind of caught what I wanted. I'm working on another painting right now of Yosemite Valley. Yeah, a little slower, you know, good start on this one. So,
Lay it down on the table so we can see it. Yeah, well,
sure.
yeah,
Or
not
hold
on-
it, hold it above.
yeah, hold it above the painting. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is coming together pretty well. I was working on this last night. So anyway, yeah, that's, you know what, that was, yeah, it was just that whole 4 days I was up there in September, the cloud shapes were just spectacular. So anyway, I hope that it was informative or was fun for you guys, you know. Yeah, you're welcome. So it's good, you know, I recommend that for everybody with in painting is work on it until you put some energy in, and then, you know, you're tired or you're hungry or whatever. And then when you're done, just, you know, step back from it, step away from it, get away from it for a while, and then come back and see which, you know, I remember studying with Charles Reed, who you may know was a fabulous watercolorist. He's gone now, but, you know, I asked him, like, when do you know when you're done? You know, when do you stop painting? And he says, when I start to fiddle faddle. And that's what people do. They go, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure what to do, so I'm going to do that. And that's a recipe for overwork. So it's good just to stop, you know, sometimes when you're not quite sure what to do next. Sometimes you just got to step back and let it dry a little bit, because the colors will lighten. And then, you know, just give it a day or so, go do something else, and then you'll come back to it with fresh eyes. And then with that, then you can look at it and say, this area I'm not satisfied with. Or you might just as well go, you know, it's done. That doesn't need anything else. And you prevented yourself from putting in something that you regret, you know, kind of overworking it. So that's a good start. I'm okay with that. You know, there's definitely some things I'll probably tune up on. I can see the shadow size of the trees are getting